What does it actually take to push through setbacks and build real success? Is it just natural talent, consistent hard work, or the subtle lessons we learn from everyday struggles that shape regular people into stronger, wiser versions of themselves over time? I used to think resilience was something you either had or didn't, like blue eyes or perfect pitch. Then I met Mrs. Chen. It was my third day at the hardware store, and I was already wondering if I'd made a mistake. 6 months earlier, I'd been a junior architect at one of the city's most prestigious firms. Now I was explaining the difference between Phillips head and flathead screws to customers who looked at me like I was speaking another language. The fall from grace had been swift and brutal. One miscalculation on a major project, one structural error that wasn't caught until construction was already underway, and suddenly I was the guy who cost the firm $2 million and nearly got someone killed. These things happen, my boss had said when he fired me, but they can't happen here. I'd applied to 17 other firms, 17 rejections. Word travels fast in architecture, and my name was now synonymous with expensive mistakes. So here I was, 28 years old with a master's degree from MIT, trying to figure out if someone needed a 1/4 inch or 3/8 bolt. Mrs. Chen shuffled in that Tuesday morning like she owned the place. She was maybe 60, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and hands that looked like they'd built half the city themselves. "You're new," she said. Not really a question. "Yeah, first week." She studied me with the intensity of someone reading blueprints. "What did you do before this?" I could have lied. Should have, probably. Instead, something about her steady gaze made me tell the truth. I was an architect. Made a big mistake. Now I'm here. She nodded slowly. Mistakes have a way of teaching us things we can't learn any other way. "What's your name?" "David." "Well, David, I need help with a project. You any good with your hands, or just good with drawings?" That question stung, but I followed her out to the parking lot where a beat-up pickup truck held what looked like the remnants of a small building. "My community center," she said, running her hand along a splintered beam. "Tornado took it apart last month. Insurance says it's a total loss, not worth rebuilding." "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it. "Don't be sorry. Be useful." She fixed me with that measuring look again. "I'm rebuilding it myself. Could use someone who knows about structural integrity." I almost laughed. "Lady, I'm the last person you want giving advice about structural integrity." "Are you?" she asked. "Or are you the first person who really understands why it matters?" That afternoon, I found myself kneeling in a muddy lot behind the community center, helping Mrs. Chen sort through salvageable materials. She worked with the methodical patience of someone who'd rebuilt things before. "This is my third community center," she said, stacking usable boards. "First one burned down in '98. Electrical fire. My fault. I'd done the wiring myself, thought I knew what I was doing. What happened? Lost everything. Building, equipment, programs we'd been running for 5 years. 30 kids had nowhere to go after school." She paused, holding up a board to check if it was still straight. "That fire taught me to respect electricity. And the second one? Flood in 2010. Built it too close to the creek. Didn't account for a 100-year flood happening twice in 12 years. She shrugged. "That one taught me to respect water. So the tornado is teaching me to respect wind." She smiled, but there was steel behind it. Each time I learned something new. Each time I build it better. We worked until dark, sorting materials, measuring salvageable lumber, planning the rebuild. Mrs. Chen had no formal training in construction, but she'd accumulated decades of hard-won knowledge. Every mistake had become a lesson, every failure a foundation for the next attempt. "Why do you keep rebuilding?" I asked as we loaded tools back into her truck. She was quiet for a long moment. "You know what I did before I started the first center?" I shook my head. "I was a secretary at an insurance company. Good job, steady pay, never had to worry about tornadoes or floods or electrical fires." She climbed into the driver's seat. "But I also never had to worry about whether 30 kids had a safe place to do homework, or whether Maria Rodriguez learned to read, or whether Tommy Kim discovered he was good at something other than getting in trouble." She started the engine, then rolled down the window. "The building isn't the point, David. The building is just what makes the point possible. You understand the difference?" I thought I did, but it took weeks of working with her to really grasp what she meant. Mrs. Chen approached every aspect of the rebuild with the same methodical persistence. When we hit bedrock sooner than expected while digging the foundation, she didn't curse or complain. She redesigned the basement layout. When the lumber delivery was short by 200 board feet, she drove to 3 different suppliers until she found what we needed at a price we could afford. "Most people think resilience is about bouncing back," she told me one afternoon as we framed walls. But that's not quite right. A rubber ball bounces back. What we're doing is bouncing forward. What's the difference? A rubber ball returns to exactly the same shape it was before. We're not trying to rebuild the exact same community center that got destroyed. We're building a better one, using everything we learned from losing the others. The foundation was stronger this time, rated for winds up to 150 mph. The electrical system was professionally installed, with backup generators and surge protection. The site was elevated 4 feet above the previous flood line, with proper drainage and water management. But the improvements weren't just technical. Mrs. Chen had redesigned the interior layout based on 15 years of watching how kids actually used the space. The kitchen was bigger because she'd learned that cooking together was one of the most effective ways to build community. The study area had better acoustics because she'd seen how noise could derail a child's concentration. Every mistake teaches you something, she said, installing sound dampening panels. The question is whether you're paying attention to the lesson. I was learning more than construction techniques. I was watching someone who'd turned failure into expertise, setbacks into strength. Mrs. Chen wasn't naturally gifted at building. She told me about early projects where she'd installed doors upside down and mixed concrete wrong. But she was naturally gifted at learning, at extracting useful knowledge from every mistake. "What about you?" she asked one day. "What did your mistake teach you?" I'd been dreading that question, but I'd also been thinking about it. That I was careless, overconfident. I trusted my calculations without double-checking them against reality. "That's a good start," she said. "What else?" "I don't know. That I'm not cut out for architecture?" She stopped hammering and looked at me. "Or that you weren't cut out for the kind of architecture you were doing. There's a difference." "What do you mean?" "You've been here 6 weeks. You've caught 3 measurement errors I made, suggested 5 design improvements, and figured out how to reinforce that corner beam when the original plan wasn't going to work." She gestured around the nearly complete building. "Seems like you're plenty cut out for architecture, just maybe not the kind where you sit in an office all day and never see how your decisions affect real people." The community center reopened on a Saturday in October. We'd been working on it for 4 months, every evening and weekend. Local kids had started hanging around toward the end, curious about what was happening. Now they filled the space, testing every corner, claiming their territories. Maria Rodriguez, now 23, brought her 5-year-old daughter to see the new building. Tommy Kim, who'd become a social worker, was already planning programs. A new generation of kids who'd never seen the previous centers were discovering the books and games and computers. "You know what the secret is?" Mrs. Chen asked, watching the controlled chaos of opening day. "Building stronger foundations?" She laughed. "That's part of it. But the real secret is understanding that failure isn't the opposite of success. It's the raw material of success." I'd heard similar platitudes before, but watching Mrs. Chen, I finally understood what they actually meant. She hadn't succeeded despite her failures. She'd succeeded because of them. Every tornado, flood, and fire had taught her something essential that couldn't be learned any other way. "The difference between people who give up and people who break through," she continued, "isn't that some people are naturally tougher. It's that some people are naturally more curious about their failures than they are ashamed of them." That hit me like a physical blow. I'd been carrying my architectural mistake like a badge of shame instead of treating it like data. I'd been so focused on what it said about my inadequacy that I'd never asked what it might teach me about doing better. Mrs. Chen retired from active construction after we finished the center, but she started a new project, teaching other people how to rebuild after disasters. She'd accumulated a library of hard-won knowledge about flood-resistant foundations, wind-resistant framing, fire-resistant materials, and community-centered design. "Someone's going to lose everything to the next storm," she told me. "I can't prevent that, but I can make sure they don't have to figure out how to rebuild from scratch." I stayed at the hardware store for another year, partly because I needed the job, but mostly because I was learning things about construction and materials that no architecture school had taught me. I started helping other customers with their projects, gradually building a reputation as someone who could solve practical problems. The call came on a Tuesday morning. A small firm across town had lost their junior architect to a family emergency and needed someone who could hit the ground running on a community housing project. "I have to be honest," I told the principal during our interview. "I made a major error at my last firm. Cost them a lot of money." He nodded. "I heard. I also heard you've been helping rebuild the Chen Community Center. Linda Chen speaks very highly of your work. You know Mrs. Chen? She's been fighting City Hall for 20 years to get better building codes for low-income housing. When Linda Chen endorses an architect, people pay attention. He leaned back in his chair. The question isn't whether you've made mistakes. The question is what you've learned from them. I got the job. The housing project was everything my previous work hadn't been. Practical, community-focused, designed for real people with real constraints. Instead of chasing architectural awards, we were solving actual problems. How to make small spaces feel larger, how to design for families that couldn't afford high maintenance, how to create privacy and community simultaneously. I found myself drawing on everything I'd learned during those months with Mrs. Chen. The importance of drainage and ventilation, the way sound travels through different materials, how children actually move through spaces versus how adults think they move through spaces. But more than technical knowledge, I'd absorbed her approach to problems. When we hit unexpected bedrock during excavation, I didn't panic. I redesigned. When the city required additional accessibility features that weren't in the original budget, I found creative solutions instead of throwing up my hands. You're different than most architects, the project manager told me halfway through construction. More practical, less precious about your ideas. I learned from someone who rebuilt the same building 3 times, I said. Teaches you not to get too attached to any particular solution. The housing project was completed on time and under budget. More importantly, it worked. Families moved in. Kids played in the courtyards. Neighbors actually talked to each other. It wasn't going to win design awards, but it was going to house people well for decades. Mrs. Chen came to the open house. She walked through the unit slowly, testing door handles, checking sight lines, nodding approvingly at details that most people wouldn't notice. Good bones, she said finally. This will last. Thanks to what you taught me. No, she corrected. Thanks to what you were willing to learn. There's a difference. 5 years later, I'm running my own firm. We specialize in community-centered projects, schools, libraries, affordable housing, disaster recovery. It's not the glamorous kind of architecture I once thought I wanted, but it's the kind that matters. I still think about that miscalculation that cost me my first job, but now I understand it differently. It wasn't proof that I was a bad architect. It was proof that I was an architect who'd never learned to test his assumptions against reality. The mistake wasn't the end of my career, it was the beginning of my education. Mrs. Chen was right about resilience. It's not about bouncing back to where you were, it's about bouncing forward to where you need to be. Every setback contains information. Every failure carries forward momentum, if you're curious enough to extract it. The community center she rebuilt is still standing, still serving kids, still hosting programs that wouldn't exist if she'd given up after the first fire. That's the real measure of resilience. Not whether you avoid falling, but what you build in the space between falls. Natural talent matters. Consistent hard work matters. But what matters most are the subtle lessons hidden in everyday struggles, the wisdom that accumulates from paying attention to your mistakes instead of just suffering through them. The strongest people aren't the ones who never break. They're the ones who break beautifully, who let their fractures become the places where new growth emerges. They understand that resilience isn't a trait you're born with. It's a skill you develop, one failure at a time, one lesson at a time, one choice at a time, to get curious instead of giving up. Every morning when I drive past the Chen Community Center, I'm reminded that the space between falls isn't empty. It's where transformation happens, where regular people discover they're capable of becoming stronger, wiser versions of themselves. That space is where we learn what it actually takes to push through setbacks and build real success. Not talent alone, not hard work alone, but the willingness to treat every fall as a teacher and every teacher as a gift. I keep a photo on my desk now. Mrs. Chen and me on opening day of the community center, both of us covered in sawdust and grinning like we'd just conquered the world. In a way, we had. We'd taken something broken and made it stronger than it was before. We'd transformed a disaster into an opportunity, a setback into a setup for something better. That's the real secret hiding in plain sight. Every person who seems naturally resilient has simply learned to see patterns where others see chaos, to find lessons where others find only loss. They've discovered that the space between falling and rising is where all the magic happens. 3 years after opening my firm, I got a call that would test everything Mrs. Chen had taught me. Roosevelt Elementary had suffered severe earthquake damage. The district faced a choice: demolish and rebuild for $12 million, or rehabilitate for half that cost in just 4 months. Every other firm says it's impossible, Sarah Martinez from the school district told me. Standing in the damaged library, surrounded by fallen debris, I heard Mrs. Chen's voice. The building isn't the point. The building is just what makes the point possible. This wasn't just a building. It was where 400 kids learned to read, where families gathered, where generations had built their futures. I called Mrs. Chen. I need you to teach my team what you taught me. The Roosevelt Project became a masterclass in adaptive resilience. Instead of viewing earthquake damage as catastrophe, we treated it as opportunity to fix decades-old problems. Foundation cracks revealed poor soil composition that had caused settling issues for years. We used mandatory repairs to install proper drainage and seismic systems. Roof collapse exposed outdated electrical and HVAC systems we replaced with modern alternatives. Mrs. Chen insisted we involve the community in rebuilding. These people know how this building actually gets used, she told my team. Ask them. We held design sessions bringing together teachers, parents, staff, and students. Ms. Rodriguez pointed out the library's terrible acoustics. Custodians explained blind spots that made supervision difficult. Parents noted the chaotic pickup area. Each insight became a design solution. We reconfigured the library with sound dampening and flexible spaces. We redesigned sightlines throughout. We reimagined drop-off with proper traffic flow. You're not just fixing what broke, observed Maria Santos, a parent who'd attended Roosevelt 30 years earlier. You're fixing what never worked right. Every breakdown is a chance for a breakthrough, Mrs. Chen agreed. The 4-month deadline forced creative thinking. We developed modular construction, allowing multiple work streams simultaneously. When gymnasium flooring couldn't be completed in time, we partnered with a local manufacturer for revolutionary surfacing installed in days, not weeks. But the real validation came from watching Roosevelt Elementary come back to life. On opening day, 400 kids walked into a building that was stronger, smarter, and more beautiful than what they'd left 4 months earlier. The new library buzzed with excited conversations that didn't interfere with individual study. Teachers moved confidently through spaces designed with clear sightlines and logical flow patterns. Parents dropped off their children in a system that eliminated the old traffic chaos. Mrs. Rodriguez stood in her new classroom, natural light streaming through energy-efficient windows, tears streaming down her face. It's like the earthquake gave us permission to dream bigger, she said. Standing in the renovated gymnasium as kids played basketball on floors that had been impossible just months before, I realized that Mrs. Chen had taught me something even more profound than I'd understood. Resilience isn't just about individuals bouncing back from setbacks. It's about communities learning to transform challenges into opportunities for collective growth. The Roosevelt Project established a new model for school rehabilitation that's been adopted by districts across the state. But more than that, it proved that the space between falling and rising isn't just where individuals heal, it's where communities discover what they're truly capable of becoming. Mrs. Chen passed away peacefully last spring, at age 74. Her funeral was held in the community center we'd rebuilt together, with overflow crowds in the gymnasium at Roosevelt Elementary connected by live video. People came from all over the region. Construction workers, teachers, students, families, whose lives had been touched by her patient wisdom about turning setbacks into strength. Her son found a notebook among her effects, filled with observations about resilience and recovery. One entry, dated just a few weeks before she died, read, "The question isn't whether bad things will happen. The question is whether we'll be curious enough about the bad things to discover the good things they make possible." I keep that notebook in my office now, next to the photo of us covered in sawdust. Both serve as daily reminders that the strongest foundations are built not on perfect ground, but on ground that's been tested, cracked, and carefully rebuilt with wisdom earned from previous failures. Every project my firm takes on now begins with the same question Mrs. Chen taught me to ask: what is this problem trying to teach us? Sometimes the answer leads to technical innovations. Sometimes it leads to design breakthroughs. But always, it leads to something better than what we started with. That's what it actually takes to push through setbacks and build real success. Not the absence of problems, but the presence of curiosity about what problems might be trying to tell us. Not natural talent or relentless hard work alone, but the accumulated wisdom that comes from treating every struggle as a teacher and every setback as a setup for transformation.